Nice to have you. Tom, nice to have you. Welcome. We're going to be kind of sticking in a particular part of the Bible today. I was asked a question by somebody the other day, and when I started to read it and study it out, I realized I don't do a whole lot of teaching and preaching out of the historical books. And so for today, at least, we're in 1 Kings 12. 1 Kings 12. It'll kind of be our theme throughout the morning and evening. We do have a business meeting tonight. Hope I'm not crashing your Super Bowl plans. Say, who do you think's going to win? Didn't put any thought into it. Don't really care. 1 Kings chapter 12. And we're looking at part of Israel's history that is quite unique. What I mean by that is why a lot of Christians don't get a lot of the New Testament and perhaps understand a whole lot about Scripture as far as prophecy is concerned, is because they don't understand history. And the older I get, the more convinced I become that if you don't understand history, and more importantly, how man has acted throughout history, then you are destined to, and I know there's a quote out there, about you're doomed to repeat it, but I'm not just worried about repeating history. I get concerned when I see Bible-believing Christians who drastically underestimate the carnal and sinful reflexes of man because they don't know history. You learn a lot about man as a race, right? And I'm not talking about continental races like black, white. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the human race, Adam's race, right? I don't care what culture a person's raised in. I don't care what color their skin is. Every one of us is a member of Adam's race. And that means we all have the same proclivities, the same reflexes, the same frailties. And we have a tendency to respond to the same kind of events in similar ways. And I see Christians that make tragic errors in their personal lives because they underestimate man, both in what man can do and what man can do when he falls, right? We were talking earlier, right, about a friend of mine, man who was in my church for several years, kind, generous, giving man that gravely underestimated the power of his flesh to, as the Bible puts it, return like a dog unto his own vomit. And there are Christians that say, oh, I'm saved now. The Lord took that life from me. Well, He did. But don't think you can't choose to get it back. You can. You might not choose it today, but you've got to be real careful and put the right implementations into your life, the right walls, the right protections. Hold yourself to a standard so that you don't go back into where you were. Now you can say, oh, you're talking about people that are users. No, I'm talking about me. I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about mindsets that I had when I was a younger man before I got saved that led me down a lot of dead-end paths. That was taking me on a path that was not the best for me. Therein lies the underestimation of the power of an individual's flesh. You know, and you have to realize that you're that person, and you have to protect yourself. That's what the Bible means when it says, guard thine heart with all diligence, for out of it come the issues of life. You want your life to issue the right things, you have to guard your heart. You don't guard your heart, you'll start issuing the wrong things. For as a man purposeth in his heart, so is he. You got to make sure you have the right purpose. If you don't have the right purpose, then of course your life will just, deflect off into an area or a place or a way that you never intended for it to go. What history tells us is that the man that had the most potential to do things for the Lord was a man by the name of Solomon. Solomon being the third and final king of the United Kingdom of Israel. You know, when you think about Israel as a nation, Israel as a people, you read through 1 Kings, 2 Kings, the Chronicles, and you see that Israel has had a whole bunch of kings. Not to mention the Herodian line at the time of the birth of Christ, which was, of course, a completely illegitimate line. But Israel doesn't have a shortage of kings. What Israel has is a shortage of a time period when they were united as a nation and had the favor of God. And if you break it down, Saul reigned for 40 years. David reigned for 40 years. Solomon reigned 40 years. The United States of America is older by far than what the nation of Israel had as a united kingdom, with the favor and hand of God upon them. And the fellow that had the greatest opportunity, in my opinion, that had the greatest letdown, to whom much is given, much is required. And the guy that had everything at his disposal was a man by the name of Solomon. As far as the world measures things, he had two things that everybody in this world would want if you had to accomplish something. He had wisdom beyond the measure of any other person walking on the earth, and he had wealth beyond the measure of any other person walking on the earth. Now, one would think, with all of that wisdom and all of that wealth, who could stand in his way? And you know what the answer is? He got in his own way. Why? Because he took unto himself many strange women. He didn't guard his heart. 1,000 women in his life. Some of us say, it's all I can do to keep one happy. Could you imagine having to keep 1,000 happy? You say, but that's just cultural. Yeah, but if you study the culture, those 1,000 women were in his life. He set out to discover the meaning of life. And in no less than 12 different areas, he tried to indulge himself to find true meaning. And that's really what the book of Ecclesiastes is. It's a culmination of the results. And one of the key phrases in Ecclesiastes is vanity of vanities, all is vanity. When Solomon dies, the most tragic mistake he makes is that the kingdom is not prepared to have a leader take it. There was no leader that had the heart of the people and at the same time valued the heartbeat of God. And so when he dies, his son Rehoboam is prepared to take the throne. And if you are in 1 Kings chapter 12, it says, "And Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel were come to Shechem to make him king." This was a prominent city that had a geographical location that was extremely important. And so he goes to Shechem to meet with the 12 tribes. And it came to pass when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who was yet in Egypt, heard of it, for he was fled from the presence of King Solomon. Jeroboam dwelt in Egypt. See, Jeroboam was a fellow who had great courage. He would have been considered in our world a patriot to some degree. In other words, he had courage and valor. He had bravery. But what he didn't have was true biblical spirituality. And he was deemed dangerous in the kingdom of Solomon. And Solomon exiled him to Egypt, and he's hiding out in Egypt for his own life. And now Solomon is dead. God bless you. And he hears Rehoboam is going to take the throne. But if we just use our imagination for just a little bit, the Bible doesn't tell us a whole lot about Rehoboam. But you can imagine that Rehoboam was a man who was raised in a king's house. And you think about it. What do you mean, raised in a king's house? Well, probably had all his needs met. Probably had a butler. He's probably a little soft. Could have lived life off of his dad's coattails. Wasn't a very good leader because he knew they didn't have to be. He was just going to be a leader just because of birth. And so when Jeroboam hears that Rehoboam is, and I understand when you start to listen to the names that end in Boam, it can get a little confusing. The average Bible reader, they hear about all these Boams and they're like, all right, that's a little confusing. But you have Jeroboam, not a rightful heir. He was actually the son of a servant in Solomon's house. Rehoboam's the rightful heir. And so Jeroboam hears and he says, you know what? I think I could become a mighty man in the kingdom, because whether Rehoboam knows it or not, he needs a man like me in his kingdom. And I'm not going to read the rest of chapter 12, but essentially Jeroboam comes and says, hey, listen, your dad built cities and built armies, and what began to happen in Solomon's reign is that he built a great testimony for himself, but he did it at the expense of the people's blood, sweat, and tears. Now, do you mind if I teach you a little Bible? When you go back to the early chapters of 1 Samuel, there was a time at the end of the book of Judges, going into the time of Samuel, who was the seer, that the nation of Israel, now in the land, they looked around and saw all these Gentile nations, and they had kings. Now they had false idols, but they had kings and they had armies, and the armies knew how to march, and they said, we want a king. And God said, you don't need a king. I'm your king. I can protect you better than a king can ever protect you. And they continued to petition the Lord and said, but we want a king because we want to be just like the other nations. And God said, that's not a good aspiration. You don't really want to be like all the other nations. Now, if I could stop right there and have a little sidebar, because I like to help you connect dots. If you fast forward to the 1960s in the United States, Brother Ed's nodding his head with a smile because he knows what I'm going to say. What began to happen in our education system in the United States is that they began to teach how good all the other nations had it. And they began to lie and grossly exaggerate how wonderful it would be to have a socialistic system where everybody has equality and diversity. And they've been beating that drum for 60 years. And they finally got to a point now where a significant, not a majority, don't ever believe it's a majority, it's not, but a surprisingly larger number than one would think of people in the United States say, why can't we be more like Canada? Do you really want to be like, do you have any idea what Canada's going through right now? Why can't we be more like France? Why can't we be more like... And Americans are so foolish that they want to be like all the other nations are, not knowing that for 200 years or more, we've been the nation that everybody else emulated. Now we have Americans that say, why can't we be more like? Why can't we be more like? Why can't... They don't realize what they have here. And so the nation of Israel said, we want to be more like the nations around us. And God said, no, you don't. And they said, yes, we do. God said, I strongly advise against it. They said, but we want a king. And God said, if you want a king, let me tell you what's going to happen. That king is going to now have to build his kingdom. And he's going to build it on your backs. And he's going to build it on your tax money. And he's going to send your sons out to war. Now, if you don't go that route, I'll fight for you. I'll be your king. I'll be your provider. I'll be your protection. And I would love to stand here and tell you that the nation of Israel said, okay, God, you're right. But they said, no, we want a king. And God said, fine, here you go. Here's a king that you deserve. And he gave them Saul, a man who stood head and shoulders above all the other men in the kingdom. People don't realize it, but Saul could very well have been the size of Shaquille O'Neal. You know how big a man Shaq is? What's that? Yeah, he's a big guy, right? But now Goliath was still 4 feet taller. But when they looked, okay, who's going to go fight him? The guy that was the man who should have gone, if you look at physical stature, it was Saul. But we know that when David gets to the valley of Elah, Saul's army isn't even on his body. You understand what I'm saying here? Saul had the build, but he didn't have the heart. Now you know, now you begin to see when a little 17-year-old kid shows up. I always make David 5'5" because that's how tall I am. But a little ruddy boy. And he says, is there not a cause? I'll go fight the Philistine. It's not by strength, and it's not by might. I'll go fight him. And I'll bring you back his head. Like, phew. You talk about getting blown away. Well, you need to be prepared. He said, no, I've not proved any of this. I'll tell you what I have proved. I've proved him. And I'm pretty good with a sling. Let me just go out with that. And he picked up how many stones? 5. 5 smooth stones. 1 for Goliath, and the other 4 for his brothers. Because he knew this was going to be a family issue. And you're familiar enough with the story that when God said, now, if you were wise and you wanted to pick a king, you would have voted upon a man's stature. God said you should vote based upon a man's heart. It's not, what's it say, the saying? It's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. He said, you chose based upon what you saw. I chose based upon what I know, because I know the hearts of men. Now we know that David was not a perfect man. And my favorite saying is, I would trust David with my life more than any other character in the Bible other than Jesus. But I wouldn't trust him with my wife for 10 minutes. I trust him with my life, but not with my wife. But I mean it with all of my heart. If I had to be in a foxhole and had to fight my way out, and they said you can pick any man you want, I'm picking David. That's my choice. Before Samson, I'm picking David. Of all the things that David did in his life, do you know what he never did? he never one time was guilty of idolatry. There's not one record of him being an idolater. He understood it. And now Solomon comes. And Solomon is told by God, ask whatever you want and I'll grant it you. And Solomon asked for wisdom. And God is so blessed by Solomon's request that he says, you could have asked for this and this and this. You could have asked for all of these things, and you didn't ask for any of those things. But you asked for wisdom so that you could rightly govern your people. And because you didn't ask for those things, I'm going to give them to you anyway. Now you understand the potential that Solomon had. But he didn't have what his dad had. He didn't guard and protect his heart against idolatry. And Solomon is one, and by the way, on Wednesday nights I will teach you this. In the next chapter, when we talk about the beast that comes up out of the water, we'll show you the historical, biblical types of Antichrist in the Bible. And Solomon is one of the very, very few people in the Bible that is both a type of Christ and at the same time a type of Antichrist. That's not easy to do. To be a type of both. He was a type of Christ, and at the end of his life became a type of Antichrist. And so now when he dies, his son Rehoboam, now you have an idea where we're at, right? Now Rehoboam's going to take the throne. What Rehoboam did was silly. Jeroboam comes and says, hey, if you ease the burden, I mean, Joe Biden said, you elect me, I'm going to raise your taxes. Right? No bones about it. Lower? I'm going to raise them. I'm going to make it harder on you. I'm going to take more of your money. Jeroboam came and said, hey, ho. If you ease the burden that your father put on us to build his kingdom, we'll serve you forever. But if you don't, you're going to have a problem. And here's what here's what Rehoboam did. He went to the elder sages. You know, the Bible says in a multitude of counselors, there is wisdom. And he went to the men that knew his father, the elder men. And he sought counsel, and they said, ease the burden. Keep the kingdom united, and all things will be well. And then he went to the younger men, the brash men, the prideful men. And they said, you know what you tell them? You tell them you thought you had it tough under Solomon. You wait until I get a hold of you. My father disciplined you with whips. I'll discipline you with scorpions. Rehoboam made a tragic mistake. He listened to the counsel of the younger idiots, the morons, instead of heeding the counsel of the elder sages. And that kind of catapults the story of the nation of Israel to this place. Don't ever, ever, ever let anybody tell you the Bible and politics don't mix. There's politics all throughout the Bible. Those who ignore it are not very good politicians. Those that understand it, understand levels and levels of government and authority. Because what is government? Government's an authority, right? That's what government is. It's your authority. There are government officials. The level of government officials in the judicial branch are police officers. And when they say stop, guess what you're supposed to do? Stop. Now, as long as they're doing the right thing, then they're a terror to evil. Right? When they're not doing the right thing, they will become a terror on the good. And now you're starting to see the division happening. You know. Now, well, I'm not going to go down that road, but I think you understand what I'm saying. We were talking about this on the way to church this morning. You know, Canada elected Trudeau, and I'm not going to go down that road either, but there's legislation, Bill NC-16, I believe is the name of it in Canada, that makes it illegal. It's illegal to speak certain words. That would, like the first time ever in the jurisprudence system of the British Empire, that it was illegal, like in other words, mandatory speech. And it was all designed so that if somebody shows up on a college campus and says, I identify with a cricket, and when you address me, you got to go, like, make a sound. I will not respond to you unless you talk to me like a cricket. Now, that's a silly, stupid example. But according to that bill, if you didn't, you'd now be in violation of a law. And you can be either fined or eventually imprisoned. Say that's absurd. I understand that. You understand that. But those that backed Bill NC-16 didn't care. And so now what happens? I can tell you what happens. You get a teacher here in the United States, and I actually heard about this, don't know if it was factual, but one of the students in a classroom in the United States identified as a cat. Did you see that, Tom? Identified as a cat. And demanded that the teacher meow when the teacher referred to, was it a boy or a girl? A boy. He said, I identify as a cat, and you will meow when you talk to me. And the teacher said, I'm not doing that. And the teacher got reprimanded. She got fired. Substitute teacher lost her job because she wouldn't meow in a classroom. Say, but that's crazy. I'm not saying it's sanity. I'm saying that eventually this whole thing can turn where that laws are now a terror to the good. How does all that become relevant? Well, in 1 Kings chapter 12, look in verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in Mount Ephraim. Rehoboam will not capitulate. And so Jeroboam takes the 10 nations, the 10 tribes, and they become Israel, or the northern kingdom. Anybody understand Ireland, you know that there's a division in Ireland, right? There's the northern and the southern. There's the Protestant and the Catholic. You understand? I can tell you how it all started. Believe me, the Vatican was behind it. It was all a popish thing. But it's very similar, right? There's a division. Same people are divided, occupying one land, but two divisions. Jeroboam said in his heart, verse 26, "Now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam, king of Judah." Now you understand the division. There's Israel, 10 northern tribes, and Judah, the 2 southern tribes. The 2 southern tribes are those of the tribe and lineage and bloodline of Judah, son of Jacob, and Benjamin, the youngest of Jacob. 2 brothers against 10 brothers. 2 tribes against 10 tribes. The 2 southern tribes occupy Judah, particularly Jerusalem, city of peace. The 10 northern tribes are still under the law, the Mosaic law. And so now, on no less than 3 times a year, they're to go to Jerusalem to worship in the temple. You understand that? Jeroboam says, 3 times in the year, the men are going to have to go down or up in the Bible, even though it's geographically down. It's always up in Scripture. They're going to go to Jerusalem. They're going to get under the influence of Rehoboam, and their hearts are going to get right with God, and I'm going to lose my influence and power over them. Because they're going to understand the power of unity. Everybody understand that? That's what he's saying in verse 26. And Jeroboam said in his heart, "Now shall the kingdom return to the house of David." He's concerned. If this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. He said if they go and they obey 3 times a year, Rehoboam might capture their hearts. They're going to rebel against me. They'll wind up killing me. And so now I have to do something to stop them from going up or geographically down to Jerusalem to worship. Look at verse 28. Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. Now, you're smart, intelligent men. When's the last time you remember reading about a golden calf in the Bible? They come out of Egypt. They're not far into the desert. Moses is up on the mountain, and the people make a golden calf. Now, question, how did God react to that golden calf? Was he happy? Was he delighted? Was he enthralled? No, he judged them. And he opened the earth, and many of them fell in. So now you talk about literally doubling down. Jeroboam doubles down on this thing and says, we'll make 2 golden calves. And he puts one in Bethel, which is a very prominent place in the Old Testament. That means house of God. And the other one he puts in Dan. And not too very long ago I preached a sermon. may have been on Wednesday night when I talked about, when you get to Revelation 7 and Revelation 14 and you have the tribes listed. Dan is not listed there. And I told you how Dan went off into the occult, satanic worship, and we talked about the Danes and the Danish and the nation of Denmark, how they're all from the tribe of Dan. So he builds 2 golden calves, sets up 2 cities, and places the calves there for the people to go. And here's what he said in verse 28. It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. This is now a religion of convenience. You know how many churches aren't having church anymore? They're just doing online. Let's make it convenient for everybody. Even men that I know, independent, fundamental Bible believers, they don't have Sunday night church anymore. They don't have Wednesday night church anymore because it's just easier to stay home and worship from your house. Yeah, but the problem is when Jesus died, he didn't say men ought to love their wives as they love their house. He said men ought to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. And so you have a tremendous compromise going on. What you have today, and this is exactly what I mean when I say if you don't understand history and how the reflexes of men react in different times. Jeroboam said, I'll make it easier for them. I'll make a convenient religion. That's what you see on the marquee outside where it says, come as you are. That's what happens. I remember being up in the suburbs of Pennsylvania back when I was driving a truck, and there was I think it was an Episcopal church, and they advertised pajama Sunday school. In other words, just roll out of bed and just come to Sunday school in your pajamas. No offense, gentlemen, but I don't care to see any of you in your PJs. Okay? Say, why do they do that? Because they're trying to be cute. And they're trying to, let's just make it a religion of convenience. And that's what he did. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land. Behold thy gods, O Israel, that brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. You understand how blasphemic that is? He said these 2 golden calves brought you up out of the land of Egypt. That's just like that's the same level of religious foolishness and pride where people say, well, if Jesus don't let me in the front door, Mary will let me in the back. You talk to people like that? Are you going to heaven? Yeah, me and St. Jude. I got St. Jude right here. See? Behold, O Israel, thy gods, that brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Look at verse 30. Look at those 6 words. And this thing became a sin. It was a sin. It was a sin to do that. It was a sin then, it's a sin now. Well, Pastor, you talk way too dogmatically. It's not that you're not smart. It's not that I don't care for you personally. But you just talk way too dogmatically. You say that if a person isn't saved, they can't go to heaven. Well, first of all, I didn't say that. The Bible says that. And the second thing is I don't call anything sin unless the Bible calls it a sin. But if the Bible calls it a sin, I'm not going to say it's not a sin. Tom, people want me to lie. I'm not going to lie. Fornication is sin. Alcohol is sin. Lying is it's just a little white lie. I didn't hurt anybody. Well, it's a venial sin. No, that's the Catholic's version. Venial or mortal. They differentiate sin, One just will keep you in purgatory a little longer. The other one, well, that's pretty well set. You're going to go to hell for that one. And people don't want you to talk Bible to them. And this thing became a sin because the people bought into it. They believed it. And so today when you preach the Bible, people get offended by truth. Because in their minds, morality is fluid. Does that word sound familiar? Morality is fluid. Just like gender is fluid. Everything has to be on a moving scale now. Because it's morality and ethics that are situational. Well, it all depends. Is it wrong to lie? Well, it all depends. No, it doesn't all depend. Lying is sin, period. Yeah, but it all depends. All depends on what? How you feel? Or how God feels? I mean, that's really essentially what people are saying. You see, they might not come at you that way, but as soon as they open their mouth and say, well, I think, so what you're saying is, I need to be more concerned about what you think than what God thinks. I think the ladies are done for the first time. They're going to beat me. God bless the morning service in Jesus' name. Come on in.